All right. Good morning, everyone. I is my technology working, Jen? We got it going. Awesome.
Yes, you are good.
I am so thrilled to be with you all this morning. And when Jen extended the speaker invite, I was like, yes, I want to get on the calendar and be with you all. I have had the pleasure of working with a lot of you that are on this call today. And I was just scanning the names around folks that I've worked with in partner organizations. And then some of my Tennessee TNC folks are on the line too. So thank you all for joining as well. And for those of you who I haven't had the opportunity to meet in person or work with, I hope we can find an excuse to do it sometime soon. As Jen mentioned in my introduction, I just thought today I would just kind of story tell with you all a little bit and, share with you kind of a story that's kind of 30% my own personal journey, my own professional journey as a conservationist and a nonprofit professional, to tell you a little bit about the Nature Conservancy as an organization as well, and kind of how we've evolved over time, because I think that's important to the work that we're doing today and how it's connected to the work that I'm personally now doing as part of our Central Appalachians team. So jumping right in, I'll start with my roots. So this is me and my roots. This picture is probably circa spring of 1973. So that's my vintage era. And I feel like, the stories of where we came from are so important because they just inform like the lenses, the experiences that we've had in the world, the lenses that we have to look at the world and how we come up and come along with one another. So yeah, so this is me circa 1973. I was at my grandparents' house, which was actually my great-grandparents' house as well. And I had the joy of toddling around in what was my great-grandmother's garden. She had passed away more than 15 years before I was even born, but I knew her through all of her lovely garden scapes all across this property that survived her. What's interesting to me too, just about my particular age and vintage, is that this is the same time that a lot of the major environmental policies for the United States were passed between 1970 and 1973, Clean Water Act, National NEPA, and Endangered Species Act, all sort of coming along at the same time, and also Title IX, which has played an important part in my as well. I was really fortunate to be raised by parents and grandparents who told me this along the way. This book also was published in 1973, and my grandparents gave it to me. And it's funny, it's a story about Marina, who's the girl, and she goes back and forth between school where she has a playmate named Adam. He keeps telling her she can't do all these various jobs when they're doing role playing at school. She can't be a vet, she can't be a pilot, she has to be the assistant. And she goes back home when her parents are repeatedly telling her, no, he's wrong, you can be anything, you can do anything. And so my grandparents gave me this book when I was like in kindergarten, and I still have it. And so I just wanted to talk about that because it was so important in my life to be encouraged and to have been able to and have parents and grandparents that encouraged me to be educated and were able to support me to be educated and just sort of keep going for it. So moving forward, you might see a similar pattern in this behavior from when I was little. These are shots of me when I was in graduate school, so in the mid 1990s, a little bit of Back to the Future. But honestly, I didn't start out this way. In between the littlest person and this young woman, I jokingly call myself a sporty spice. I played basketball. And that's why I mentioned Title IX at the beginning, because I literally am one of the first generation of women that had came up through public schools and had access to the coverage that Title IX gave young women and girls in school. So I got to come up in a public school setting that always had some sort of sports activity. And I played basketball. So during those years, I spent more time in a gym than I did like outside, with the exception of in the summers, going to the lake, and we would go to the beach like one week a summer and things like that. So when I went to college, I thought that I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. You know, I was just sort of continuing that identity of being involved in sports and whatnot. And I started out as an engineering major because I was afraid that if I biology degree, I didn't know what to do with a biology degree. A lot of folks, women in my family in particular, were teachers, and I always admired and loved them. But I also saw what it took to be in that profession. And I was worried, if I don't go to med school, what do I do with a biology degree? Well, turns out that neither engineering nor med school were for me. I did sports medicine internship and I learned a lot, but I also learned that I don't want to go to med school. So about my sophomore year in college, I was like, what am I going to do? So I changed over to biology major. And I took a class in the fall. It was a dendrology class, which the entire class was wandering around. We did some work in the herbarium and wandering around outside identifying trees. And I was like, oh, okay, this feels better. I still don't know what I'm going to do with myself, but it feels better. And then in the spring, when I was looking for something to do internship wise between my junior and senior year in college, is when I first learned about the Nature Conservancy. Did not know the Nature Conservancy existed. And my introduction to the organization was a crumpled up letter on the corner of my botany professor's desk in the herbarium looking for summer interns. And I barely glanced, like I walked by his desk and it was hanging off the end of his desk. And I was like, oh, what is this? Who are these people? And he was like, oh, if you want to apply for it, I'll be a reference for you. And so that's how I learned the Nature Conservancy exists. I got hired as a paid summer intern. And that I was like, wow, okay, there are professional opportunities and there are things, in conservation that you can pursue. So that actually led me to graduate school. And I knew then that I wanted to go into conservation. I knew I really wanted to work for the Nature Conservancy if I could possibly pull it off. And so I studied cedar glades as my master's project. And when I was at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in the mid-90s, I was in what was sort of the concept of interdisciplinary graduate programs was still kind of new. I mean, just to be honest. But I was fortunate enough to get involved in a curriculum that included anthropology, environmental policy. And I included this book on the environmental policy in the 1990s, because by this point in time, a lot of those laws that had passed when I was in toddler phase had been being implemented through all of our different bureaucracies and touching down on the ground in various ways. And this was one of the environmental policy classes. It was one of my favorite classes in grad school. So kind of put a pin there in my mind about not just ecology, but also the policy side of things too. And then the other really important part of my personal story is I became a mom really early on, like literally right out of graduate school. So these boys have been along for the ride since the very beginning, especially the little one up there, Mr. 1999. He's my older son, Ben, and then my younger son, Will, is down in the little front carrier. Then the picture dated 2004. And that's Leslie Colley, who I used to work with on the Duck River. Some of you may know and remember her when she worked in Tennessee. So, from the very beginning, stepping straight out of graduate school and into my professional career, I have seen the world through the eyes of all of these. The word balance doesn't work, but I think you all understand what I mean, through the eyes of being a mom, through the eyes of bringing these guys up in the world. And here they are now. This is even a year old, these pictures. And the one on the right in the plaid is actually the older one. So little brother is bigger than an older brother now. And the reason I wanted to share this picture is because if you look at the picture on the left, they're standing next to Tennessee coneflowers. And the reason they're standing next to Tennessee coneflowers is the older one is a policy nerd and he works on Capitol Hill. And we were visiting last summer and he got in an argument with me about where Tennessee coneflowers were around Capitol Hill. And he kept telling me that they were planted over by the Rayburn office building. And I was like, no, those are not, those are purple coneflowers. I said the real Tennessee coneflowers at the botanical gardens and we have to go see them. So this was my way of saying and documenting to them, yes, there are Tennessee coneflowers in Washington, D.C. And yes, they're over by the U.S. Botanical Gardens. So I just wanted to, these are all of the pieces of me and where I came from and how I found my way into conservation work. And then what has really driven me forward to doing the work that I'm involved in today. So moving into just talking about the Nature Conservancy, and Jen and I were kind of chatting while a lot of you were in breakout rooms in the beginning. And, you know, she actually said something to me that is really one of the reasons why I have chosen to spend all of my career so far with the Nature Conservancy. And that is, we are an organization that works literally from the ground up. And it gives all of our staff, and as we integrate with all of our partners, opportunities to really actually think globally and act locally. And being a native Tennessean, one of the things that drove me to when I wanted to be in conservation, but I wanted to deliver that work and invest in that work here at home as well. So working for the Nature Conservancy all these years has really afforded me the opportunity to do that. And I just want to walk through a couple of slides about the history of the organization, because I really feel like it's an interesting story of not just one of the larger environmental organizations, but also how conservation biology has evolved and how we all have kind of been on this path together about how are we going to accomplish all of the need out there, particularly in the face of the biodiversity and climate crises. So in the 1950s, when the organization overall was founded, and you'll see on these slides as I go through these different mission statements, the words that are highlighted. So when we were founded in the 50s, we were really about the US, wild nature, that sort of westernized concept of wild nature, and living museums. Nature was other. Nature was to be set aside. Nature was to be protected. And that's sort of what guided our mission. That one of the big things that original mission statement did was ground us in science. And it drove about 30 years worth of investment in field research and natural history research and documenting in the US in particular, all of the amazing landscape and biodiversity riches. And the Nature Conservancy actually started just to get the data to understand where are the places that we should protect. And on this slide, you see two folks, Dr. Elsie Quarterman, who was a Vanderbilt researcher for years and years, cedar glade expert. And then Steve Alstead is retired from the U.S. Geological Survey. His nickname was Shell Daddy. He's one of the best freshwater mussel experts in the U.S. But these folks like Dr. Quarterman and Steve and others provided the foundational data that helped drive how we started making decisions about doing conservation. And these were the folks who first documented where are some of these special places in Tennessee. For example, Savage Gulf, which is one of the places that the Nature Conservancy helped protect very early on in the late 1970s. So moving into the 1990s, which is when I kind of joined on and was learning and becoming a conservationist, the mission shifted. So we shifted not just to be US based, but we are talking about the diversity of life on Earth, so globally. And we added lands and waters. So originally we were largely land-based, land conservation-based organization. And then we intentionally added freshwater and oceans, marine systems to the mission. So you can imagine the expansion when you expand the mission and expanding the footprint and working in other more countries around the globe. Also in the 90s, we think about GIS maps and story maps and all of the tools that we work with now, these literally only came into existence and operationalized in the conservation field in a large way in the late 1990s. And so this is actually a map, a visualization of all of the data that all of the field biologists have been collecting for years and years, and helps us again to understand what you see what this map is representing is where we have high concentrations of very rare species in the US. And the darker the red, the higher the concentration of these at-risk species. And I love this map as a Tennessean because obviously it shows how important our state is for protecting and conserving biodiversity in the US. That's largely driven by freshwater species and plants. So as the Nature Conservancy sort of expanded our mission and our vision, we also expanded our investment in the type of science that we're doing and the type of assessments that we're doing to inform the work on the ground. And this Atlas of Global Conservation was published about 12 years ago. And it was one of the first publications where not only were we talking about what's going on for where these quote unquote special places are from a biodiversity standpoint, but what is the real impact of the human footprint on the ground in climate change, transportation, all the different sectors. And it was really one of the points organizationally that I observed where our science was pushing us in a different direction with respect to how we were implementing our mission and the strategies that we were focused on. And this is the map. I like to call this the big green blob map. This is actually the United States again. But we went through an era, particularly in the late 1990s, 2000s, of doing these ecoregional maps where we were identifying the green blobs that needed to be conserved. And then we sort of got after it with a whole bunch of different tools in the toolkit. But as I mentioned before, talking about these global assessments, these are things that organizationally that we have come to know and face. And the whole concept of the living museums is not enough to stave off the biodiversity crisis. If we're going to conserve species and prevent extinctions, we also have to think about the scale at which ecological processes operate that allow these species to exist. And these last two are really important and frankly still a learning journey for our organization. Developing the green blobs on the map that are important for, say, biodiversity or climate conservation in isolation of human communities, in isolation of all of the different ecosystem service values provided, in isolation of engagement with communities is of limited value. The maps aren't enough. And we're founded by biological and ecological sciences. We need to engage and with all the different social sciences. And so when I was working through this slide, some of this I look at it and say, well, duh, a lot of that now, especially now, but it really has been a journey for the organization. And for a lot of folks that are doing the work that originated as natural sciences. So moving forward, in 2011, we changed our mission one more time. This is the mission that we operate on are still operating on now. And it's a really intentional mission shift because now you see lands and waters on which all life depends. And that means all life. That's not just plants, animals, and natural communities. It's an intentional inclusion of people in our mission statement. And when we shifted that mission statement, this has been about 10 years ago, it has shifted fundamentally how we think about doing our work as an organization. And it's still a journey that we're on now. And I just sort of summarize this up as, the importance of place, the importance of ecological processes, both for nature and ecosystem service values. And then fundamentally, not just the inclusion of people, but the leadership of people. And especially now, being the largest conservation organization on the planet, being and operating in 70 different countries, how do we need to show up as leaders, as supporters, how do we need to think about the systems that are in place that have achieved a lot for conservation purposes in some places, but also contributed to systems of oppression as well in others? And how are we going to move forward and work in new ways and with new folks? So a lot of humility in that kind of moving forward. So that's a little bit about the Nature Conservancy and kind of how we've grown as an organization over time. And I wanted to share that with you all because I think it's a really good precursor to try to describe what we are trying to do as an organization now when we talk about working together in a large landscape like the Appalachians. And I moved into this position as the external affairs advisor back in September. So I'm working with folks who I've worked with for a long time, but in a new team environment and with a new sort of frame around my job. So the Nature Conservancy has identified really for years, for ever since we started doing some of the original ecoregional planning I was talking about. But from an operational standpoint, we are making changes in how we work together across all of our operational boundaries. And the Appalachians are a landscape that we have identified as globally critical to achieving all of our 2030 goals from a biodiversity standpoint, from a carbon sequestration standpoint, and from a migratory corridor in the face of climate change standpoint. The map on the far left, we call the Resilient Connected Network. It's based on over a decade worth of scientific research to identify those places on the ground that are likely to provide the most resilience in the face of climate change. So if we are going to achieve the objectives that we have as an organization for biodiversity and climate carbon goals, the Appalachians is one of the landscapes in North America that we have to collaborate. We have a vision for the landscape of a healthy, resilient Appalachian region where people and nature thrive. And we are working across these different boundaries in the Southern Appalachians, the Central Appalachians, in New York and Northern Appalachians. We have teams of folks who are based in the business units, but then also cooperating across this programmatic boundaries on three main strategies. Still doing protection. Land protection in this landscape is still really important, but also land management, forest and freshwater restoration and management is another important strategy. And then also carbon sequestration, natural climate solutions, deployment of clean energy solutions, and how that is deeply connected to the economic transition of this region, especially in the coal fields of the Central Appalachian area. So what's my job today? I work as an external affairs advisor, and this is really what gets me up in the morning and what I think about all the time. What's the GR North Star, Government Relations North Star? How are we working together to drive more public funding towards our strategies? And how are we advancing public policy that delivers outcomes at the scales that we need? And when I talk about the scales of action and how we're trying to coordinate with one another and our partners, I'm talking specifically within the US at the federal level, at the federal region administrative level, at the state and the local level. So 3 quick examples of what that looks like. We mentioned at the beginning, I included the Forest Service as a trivia question on purpose because they are they're a critical agency partner. You can see in this map, the green is the Resilient Connected Network, the brown is the Forest Service ownership. Not only do they own most of the public land that exists in the Appalachians, they also are a federal agency that distributes a tremendous amount of funding to the states for state and private forest land management. So how we collaborate at the national level to influence Forest Service policy, legislative and administrative policy, appropriations, and how that money comes down through the administrations and out to the states, a super strategy. Another example, many of you may have heard about the Land and Water Conservation Fund. It's a major federal program funding conservation across the United States. We had a big win a couple of years ago with the Great American Outdoors Act, which solidifies $900 million going into this fund and distributing across the agencies in the states every year. but getting the legislation passed is one thing, getting the projects down to the ground is another. So this is the map of some of the critical areas in the Central Appalachians where we feel like we need to work with partners to get protection on the ground. Doing that requires collaboration at all of these different levels of government to ensure that projects come up from the ground up, where projects are originated, landowner engagement, local political support. States are a very important part of implementing land and water conservation funds, as are the processes that happen in these federal regions. So I want to share this as an example of, a federal policy that you see get passed and we have as a big win, but the getting after it and the collaboration that it takes to direct the funding and work with others to the ground is quite complex. And then the last example on the policy front that I wanted to share is the state wildlife action plans. The Nature Conservancy has been a lead science and planning and advocacy partner for state wildlife grant funds, which is the largest bucket of money that comes into the states from the federal government to help fund non-game species conservation. Over the years, these plans have become the conservation blueprints for a lot of states. There are over 12,000 species that are covered by these plans in the US, and the goal of the plans and the rationale for requiring the states to write them is to try to keep species off the endangered species list. Can we do conservation in advance that protects species and habitats? And now there is a new federal legislative opportunity is happening right now called Recovering America's Wildlife Act. And in Tennessee, I wanted to give a shout out to Lindsay Gardner, who is policy director for Tennessee Wildlife Federation. The TWF has been the lead advocate in getting our federal delegation behind and co-sponsoring Recovering America's Wildlife Act, because it will be a huge amount of funding available to the state, again, the state wildlife agencies to implement non-game conservation. For a state like Tennessee, we could go from getting, $1 million a year in a budget up to more than $15 million a year to do this work. So it's a huge opportunity. Again, a science-driven plan, but also supported by the work and the funding that's needed to do the implementation. So Jen asked me to wrap up with a call to action. And as I was thinking about speaking to you all and all the amazing work that all of you do as women leaders, and what would be my call to action message, and I thought we work across so many different sectors. I didn't want a call to action that was just sort of just specific to, conservation or a climate issue or something like that. And the first thing I wanted to say is just thank you all for the work that you are doing and for the leaders who you are. And when I was thinking about this presentation, I was reminded of a conversation that I was a part of, and this has been about 10 years ago when this book came out within the Nature Conservancy about women and about leadership. And when this book came out, I had a lot of feelings about this book. Not really positive ones, to be honest with you. At this point in my life, I was coming out of the little kid phase. I'd been working for about 15 years, and I was, I had a lot of problems with it, primarily because a lot of what she was saying in this book was very individualized and back on the individual woman, just sort of what you work your way through magically, all of these systemic issues. But so it sort of made me mad, but I decided I was like, why is this making me mad? Like, what is it also that's making me mad about what she's saying? And I tried to kind of hang with it. And what came out of it for me was a beginning of a very long learning journey about unconscious bias and what it is and how we internalize it. So this was sort of me starting 10 years ago, after having, gone through academia been in the professional working world for a while, and coming from the background of being told when I was little I can do anything, and then those we all know what this system issues that we face. And so I wanted to share this in closing with you all, because I feel like it's important. We have to keep talking about it and we are the leaders, and we are the leaders in our networks. We are the leaders in our work environment, and we still have to name it. And what I loved about this article, Dr. Jennifer Raymond wrote this, most of us are biased, and she says even herself, and she gave her own daughter, she gave her team and her own daughter one of these implicit bias studies that Harvard puts out, and even her own daughter scores that women are more suited for humanities and liberal arts, men are more suited for science. And she's like, I am a scientist, I'm a lead researcher at a lead institution, and these biases show up. So her point is that is to know it and to name it, and that this cultural transmission is going to be hanging around with us for a while. So we still have a lot of work to do. And I think it's important, particularly in groups of women leaders, that we name it and we keep at it together. So just closing up, I'll kind of come back to my roots and wings concept, and also say thank you to the women that have come before us as well. So this is me and Elsie Quarterman. I did get to meet her and spend time with her before the end of her life. This was in 2008. And she was really a pioneer in academic science. I mean, she was working on her dissertation at Duke in the late 1930s and came into Vanderbilt and made her way up through the Vanderbilt academic bureaucracy, I'll say, to lead the biology department, and literally had scores of students that she educated, who then in turn educated me and others in conservation and in plant ecology as well. And I think that she's just always a reminder to me of someone who used her good long life to be passionate about something, to stay engaged in something that gave her passion, and to share that and have a heart for learning and service for other people. So with that, I will close and say thank you once again for having me. And I am happy to, I'll stop sharing now, Jen, and take any questions, and happy to keep the conversation going.
Thank you, Sally. And what an important and inspirational message to end on. So if we were in person, you'd be getting a huge round of applause. So if anyone's on camera and wants to applaud or put up the little applaud emoji, just thank you so much, Sally.
Thank you.
We do have some questions for you, and I'm going to kick off with one of my own because it's summer and I'm selfishly always looking for new places to go explore in the state. So I wanted to ask you, as kind of a lifelong Tennessean and someone who's worked in the conservation space in Tennessee for so long, if you can give us an example of a place in Tennessee that you view as a really big conservation win, like a place that's really been conserved and protected really well, and then an example of a place that you think deserves some conservation attention and maybe could use some preserving and conserving right now.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I'm going to do a both and thing, and Elaine's on the line too, so she knows what I'm about to say. So the Duck River is an example of a place that has lived the history of all of what I'm talking about with environmental policy. And it is a win for previous generations of doing this work, for the Steve Alsteds of the world, for some of the environmental attorneys and local leaders back in the early 1970s. The fact that it still exists as a river is a win. And the work of today is, how are we helping to manage that resource in such a way that it's able to continue to provide water supply and wastewater assimilation, and manage the amazing diversity of freshwater fish and mussels that are in that river. It's one of those places that truly is remarkable. If you have the opportunity to travel in other places outside of, and we're really spoiled in Tennessee. We have a lot of remnant rivers that have a lot of our native biodiversity. That is just not true in a lot of other states. And so we're spoiled. But when there's parts of the Duck River, when you get out of your kayak and you're walking around, the bottom of the river is alive. There are thousands of animals that are you think it's all gravel, and there's a lot of gravel, but there are thousands of animals that are part of the living base of that river that would have gone extinct, locally extinct, had that river changed. So I name it as a win, but I also name it as a continuing story, because for me, it's a story of how there's moments in time where our efforts matter and change trajectories in certain ways, but it doesn't stop. There's always the next and always another piece of it as well. And rivers and water are a great example, in reality and also metaphorically of that. So
yeah,
somebody was talking about going on the Duck and higher pursuits. Yes to all of that. Those women are fabulous. Go do it, get in a kayak, and like June-ish is good because the water levels are low. October is also great too. So
yeah, I was gonna say, we're talking about a TWIG outing, so I think we're getting another plug for that. So thank you, Sally. We have a related question from Maris. She was asking if you could talk about just what are some of the top priorities right now for funding in whether that's Tennessee or in your new work in the Appalachian region.
And so I'll ask a clarifying question. By funding, Maris, what specific, do you mean something specific?
I guess I was just wondering what you guys were pushing for the most, like what support and like what was the top thing like for you? Yeah.
So in the Appalachians right now, and this is something that I got hired into this job sort of last summer and started in September. And then Congress passed the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. And the reason I point to there was like a before and after is that as I came into this job, part of my role is to help all of our business units do that federal agency influence and that back and forth, because those agencies oversee the distribution of so much money to public lands, to private lands, and to the states, and sort of working on that. The infrastructure bill just amped that up to like 11, especially with agencies like the Forest Service. And so there is funding that's coming at levels that have not existed at all in my career, that are directed to forest restoration, wildfire reduction, risk, freshwater connectivity issues, dam removals, rebuilding, those kinds of issues are really important. Another area that our chapters in Virginia, West Virginia, and a little bit lesser extent Kentucky have really been active on for years is clean energy transition, reclaiming former mine lands. How can we deploy solar as part of the energy transition? What does that mean for economic and job transition in communities that have been, coal communities for, over 150 years? Those are the kinds of things that we are working on together. And honestly, land protection still within the Central Appalachians. We need more core protected areas. So Land and Water Conservation Fund and different models of conservation finance to get that land protected are some of the big things.
Awesome, thanks, Sally. We have kind of a multi-part question. So Caitlin asked, how do you address community engagement to keep the land conservation as a positive for the local community? She said from her experience, some people might find conservation as a detriment to their land value and potentially not support that. And then Renee would like to hear kind of in that vein a little more about reactions from private landowners to these sorts of large scale conservation initiatives.
So for the first part of the question, I will say, so yes, it's a huge reality. And I'll get really kind of granular and specific to Tennessee and say that one of the issues that the organizations that have done land conservation, and we're one of many in that space, specifically in Tennessee, but have had to be really conscientious, particularly in rural areas and counties, because there is the reality in some cases, but more of a perception that when you have conservation lands, it's bringing lands off of the local tax rolls. And in a state like Tennessee, where we don't have any, our tax structure is basically sales tax and property tax, especially in these rural counties, revenue for anything is really significant. So addressing issues about what is the continued economic value of that public land is super important. And there are a number of case studies in Tennessee where when public lands have been established and recreational opportunities have been developed, that adds to the tourism value. Some of the work that our state parks are doing with respect to access and recreation and tourism in Tennessee state parks are a great example of showing the economic value in rural areas. One particular project in Upper East Tennessee, the Doe Mountain Recreation Authority, was an example of a project where we helped to acquire, the Nature Conservancy helped to acquire the land initially, but we also intentionally turned the management of that land over to a local recreation authority to make decisions about land management, to work with TWIG and other state partners, to see that particular property is utilized in a way that is supportive of local goals as well. So there's lots of different models about that. The second part of the question, I think, is what do private landowners think about these big, large land initiatives? It's connected to the issue of, public versus private ownership. But I will say that in the Eastern US in particular, and in the Appalachians in particular, it is going to be a largely private landscape. So our initiatives aren't targeted at buying up and conserving in public ownership as much land as possible. We are focused on those core areas that need to be in conservation ownership, but we also deploying a whole suite of private land management strategies, particularly with forest landowners up and down the Appalachians.
Great, thanks, Sally. And then we have another question. So we have, some TWIG members who are younger professionals, maybe looking for some words of wisdom from someone who's been in the field like yourself. And so we had a question about how you could go about gaining experience needed to work at a place like the Nature Conservancy. And then if you have any suggestions specifically for how to get more experience in GIS mapping, there's a question about that also.
So I'll go on the GIS one at first. I'm not a GIS scientist, but I know that there's a Tennessee GIS community that's really active, and some on the line here may actually be involved in that and be better equipped to answer that part of the question than I am. But I would look into that community of folks. They have active job boards, they have active networking opportunities, that sort of thing. And I think the acronym is TNGIC. So check them out, because that's the community of folks that's doing GIS. In terms of like just career development opportunity, I have always felt like I got super lucky with the job that I was able to step out of graduate school. And I've literally had, 10 different job titles in the same organization. And that's just not the case within all organizations. So, I came in as a botanist, and just was able to follow my curiosity within one organization and to move to kind of where I am today. And so I know that that's not the case in the job market environment now, and it's not the case in all organizations. But the thing what has always been true for me, and I think it's true regardless of how you think about what your own developmental moves are, is, to the extent that you can do it, follow your own curiosity. Seek those mentorships and those places and those job projects and things like that you are naturally curious about, and feel like you're moving forward into the next thing, like whatever the next thing is. I mean, I got sent to work on the Duck River like 2 or 3 years after I started working for the Nature Conservancy. I'm not an aquatic ecologist. I literally looked at my boss at the time and said, "Hey, I need an ecologist on the Duck River. Can you go do that?" And I said, "Well, hey, as long as you don't care that I'm not a freshwater expert, I'll go do that." And he was like, "I don't care." And I don't either. And so now I know all this stuff about freshwater natural resource policy because, trial by fire working that job. So, to the extent that you can do that, just follow that curiosity and don't be afraid to be, continuing active learning. And, to be honest, if you are in an environment that doesn't support your growth, then that's a signal to you to seek another environment. And those are really hard decisions. Nobody can, that's a very hard and personalized decision, but don't be afraid to make it.
Awesome. Thank you, Sally. And I want to wrap this up with just another question of mine. So during your presentation, we see these enormous opportunities for large scale land projects that can really support a lot of the Nature Conservancy's mission. And I think a lot of us on the line maybe we're not giant landowners. We can't, sign over our land to a conservation easement, but maybe some of us have little backyards or little green spaces that we are in control of. So I was wondering if you could just kind of wrap us up by giving maybe a couple suggestions for how we kind of in our own world, in our own space, can still support biodiversity and some of the Nature Conservancy's mission.
Okay, so I'm telling you what I do. Because I'm a homeowner. I'm in a suburb of Nashville, and this won't come as a surprise after this presentation, I'm obsessed with native plants to the extent that you can do your own little backyard habitat for it. That's really fun. Not everyone has a yard or a thing that they can do there. But one of the things, and this is where like being in a learning community with you all, because there's a lot of you on this space that know more about this than I do, really thinking about how can I be individually more sustainable, the old reduce, reuse, recycle kind of thing. That's as I am entering empty nest phase, which is impending on me in 12 weeks, right? You saw the pictures of the kids earlier on. That is something that personally I'm really trying to think about too. First on the reduce and simplify. And then, when you have spaces outside and you can think about native plants, and there's fun stuff that you can do, enrolling in, backyard bird watch. There's backyard habitat certifications you can get from like the National Wildlife. And it's really tremendous, particularly in urban and suburban areas. That stuff makes a difference. The conversion of those lawns and habitats to native plants makes a big difference. Somebody's posting, the pollinator partnership, all of those things actually do really matter.
Great. Thank you, Sally. And thank you again for presenting and spending your morning with us. I think we all learned a lot from you. So I really appreciate your time.
Thank you all so much too. Jen has my email address, and I hope to be showing up and participating with you all in person more often.
Awesome. So we normally switch over to our announcements at this time. We are going to do something just a little bit different today. So for those of you who are familiar with our TWIG meetings, you'll know our structure is that we have networking from 7:30 to 8 in the morning, and then we do our presentation from 8 to 9. And we are talking about potentially switching up that structure to have more time after the meeting and maybe less time at the beginning of the meeting. But we wanted to just take a pulse from membership to see what people think about that. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Renee, who's going to launch a poll and lead us through kind of an exercise there.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. My name is Renee. I am currently serving on the board. So as Jen said, we just have a quick poll. You can use your phone. I'll also put the link in the chat. If you don't want to use your phone, you can use a web browser. But it's just one question. It's really quick. So I'll share my screen. So if you, on your phone, go to menti.com and type in that number code, you can participate. And this is live, so we'll see your answers coming in. It's anonymous. Which setup would you prefer for our virtual monthly meetings? And I apologize if the font is kind of small, but we have the first option is what we're currently doing, 7:30 a.m. breakout rooms, then the monthly meeting. We could also do 15 minutes at either end of the meeting, or switching our time to starting a little bit differently. And then I'm not interested, which is totally fine. And I'll just keep this up for another minute.
I always love watching these come in live. It's so fun to see how the bars switch around.
Looks like we've got 16 responses in. I know we have 25 people here, so. Okay, awesome. Well, this is really helpful. You know, I think it looks like in first place is splitting the networking time with a little bit before the meeting and then a little bit after the meeting. But we'll take a look at the numbers on here, and you know, maybe something's really close and we just can't tell from these bar charts. But thank you, everyone. We really appreciate this feedback. Since we've gone virtual, there's been a lot of positives. We've had a lot of people be able to present from across the state. We've had a lot of people be able to attend from across the state or across the country, which is great, but totally understand not everyone's a morning person, and that can be tough. And we all experience some form of Zoom fatigue in this whole pandemic era. So this is really helpful, and we want to be sure that we're providing what our members find most useful. So we will take this feedback to the full board and update you on how anything will change.
Awesome. Thank you, Renee. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our Vice President, Elaine Boyd, to walk us through our announcements.
Great, thank you, Jen. And so I have to say right off the bat, a huge thank you to Sally Palmer. Sally is that very rare combination of a brilliant scientist and just a plain old nice person. And Sally, I miss working with you in the duck. I know you're doing amazing work in Appalachia, but come back and spend some time with us in the duck. So great to have Sally on.
Thank you, Elaine.
So welcome to Tennessee Women in Green. Welcome to Pride Month. And thank you for being here the first Friday in June. As always, we like to start with just centering on our mission. You all help us to meet our mission each and every time you connect with us. We're here to empower, inspire, and connect women who are committed to environmental sustainability. And we always like to thank our sponsors. We could not do this without our sponsors. If your workplace or you are interested in participating as a sponsor, please visit our website. There's more information how you can do just that. Thank you also to our new and renewing members. So we appreciate each of you, and we love the fact that we continue to grow even in this virtual environment. So thank you. I did want to give a shout out to our Iris's Book Club. They have not chosen the book for their next meeting, but they have chosen the date for their next meeting, which is July 26th. So please go to our website and connect with them. You can sign up for their newsletter so you get more information about the next book. I also wanted to kind of give a shout out to our seed fund. This is something we really hope people take advantage of. It's an opportunity to support women seeking to expand their skills, knowledge, and experience through continuous education opportunities. So you can go on our website and see more of the details as well as get the application. I know that more conferences have started being scheduled, so this is a great opportunity to get some assistance to participate in those. So please take advantage of the seed fund. We've got a few events in June in the community that we just wanted to remind you of. Saturday, June 11th is the Brooklyn Heights Community Garden Growing Grannies activity, and they do this every second Saturday of the month. And then every third Wednesday of the month, which would be June 15th this month, they have their energy exchange activity. And then on Thursday, June 23rd, 6:15 to 8 p.m., Fisk University has a virtual environmental health community workshop. And I know that Diane, I think, put some details on that in the chat. And then I saw also in the chat, excuse me, that Maris mentioned she's going to be a speaker on Juneteenth, June 19th. So check out the chat for more details about that. Always connect with us, share your community information with us so we can get it on the event calendar and we can announce it during our programs, and also connect with us on all the ways that we're present in social media. So thank you again for joining us. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the month. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Happy June.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen. And
Yeah,
thanks,
thanks, everyone.
Sally. That was awesome.